The thick morning mist clung to the French countryside like a gray shroud. September 19, 1944, had arrived with zero visibility beyond 30 meters. Inside his Panther tank, Ontara Fitzgerald Carl Hoffman strained to see through the cupola into the suffocating fog that blanketed everything around Baisong's laperite in Lorraine. His hands shook, not from the autumn chill penetrating the steel hull. Something far more disturbing had just happened in the swirling gray void ahead. A brief gap in the fog had revealed the impossible. An American tank destroyer had appeared from thin air. 2 quick shots rang out. Then nothing but empty mist where the enemy vehicle had been. His gunner hadn't even completed half a turret traverse before their target vanished completely. The evidence of this nightmare lay burning 50 meters to their left. Another Panther tank, reduced to a smoking wreck. This was no dream or hallucination. That morning, 42 Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade had advanced with absolute confidence. Their 75mm high-velocity guns could penetrate any Allied armor. The sloped frontal plates deflected most enemy shells with ease. German engineering had reached its peak with these machines. Every crew member had heard the same briefings repeatedly. American tanks were poorly constructed, built hastily with inferior materials, manned by inexperienced crews who relied on numbers rather than skill. The coming battle would prove German technical superiority once again. The fog-shrouded fields around Aracourt were about to teach them otherwise. What lurked in that mist would destroy every assumption they carried from years of fighting on the Eastern Front. The M18 Hellcat was preparing to demonstrate that Americans had completely reimagined tank warfare itself. Speed had replaced armor as the primary survival factor. Mobility trumped protection. Everything the Germans believed about armored combat was about to change forever. December 1941 marked the beginning of a revolution in American military thinking. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce commanded the newly established Tank Destroyer Center at Fort Meade, Maryland. His analysis of German blitzkrieg tactics reached startling conclusions. Bruce studied the problem like an engineer rather than a traditional military officer. His revolutionary concept rejected the heavyweight slugging matches that characterized tank versus tank combat. Instead of meeting German armor head-on, why not create vehicles that could strike and disappear before retaliation was possible? His vision prioritized 3 characteristics in strict order. Speed came first. Firepower ranked second. Crew efficiency held third place. Armor protection, the sacred principle of German tank design, barely registered as the 4th consideration. This philosophy would have horrified Wehrmacht planners. German tank development followed a clear progression from Panzer III through Panther to Tiger. Each generation carried thicker armor and mounted bigger guns. Survivability through protection guided every design decision. The Ordnance Department issued specifications for Bruce's revolutionary concept: fast tank destroyer using torsion bar suspension, Wright Continental R975 engine for power. Initially armed with a 37mm gun for the main weapon. Multiple prototypes emerged as the design evolved rapidly. Different armament configurations were tested extensively. The T-70 76mm gun motor carriage finally emerged from this process. This vehicle would become the production M18. July 1943 witnessed the first production models rolling off assembly lines at Buick's Flint, Michigan plant. American industry had created something that challenged fundamental assumptions about armored warfare. The vehicle would prove that mobility could triumph over protection. The Wright R975 9-cylinder radial aircraft engine provided the heart of this revolution. This power plant generated between 350 and 400 horsepower. The same engine powered M4 Sherman tanks, but the M18 weighed only 20 tons compared to the Sherman's 33-ton bulk. This weight difference created performance that seemed impossible for tracked vehicles. The Hellcat achieved 55 miles per hour on roads. Some sources indicate 60 miles per hour was possible under ideal conditions. These speeds place the M18 in an entirely different category from existing armored vehicles. German Panther tanks managed a maximum speed of 46 kilometers per hour on roads. This translated to just 29 miles per hour. The comparison became even more stark when considering cross-country performance. Panthers struggled to maintain 15 miles per hour across rough terrain, while M18s could sustain 40 miles per hour over similar ground. German armored doctrine had dominated European battlefields since 1939. Combined arms tactics perfected during the Polish and French campaigns integrated tanks with mechanized infantry, artillery, and engineers. Panzer divisions operated as cohesive units, with tanks serving as the armored fist. These steel spearheads broke through enemy lines to create chaos in rear areas. Speed mattered in this concept, but survivability held greater importance. Each new German tank generation reflected this philosophy through increased weight, heavier armor, and more powerful guns. The Panther tank, introduced in 1943, weighed 45 tons. Armor thickness reached 100 millimeters on the turret front. The Tiger II, entering service in 1944, pushed these figures to 70 tons and 180 millimeters respectively. Protection dominated every design consideration. American tank destroyer doctrine represented complete rejection of the German approach. Field Manual 18-5 formalized these concepts through 1943. Tank destroyers would remain in reserve until enemy armor concentrations appeared. Superior mobility would achieve flanking positions for side and rear attacks. Quick redeployment would occur before enemy counterattacks developed. This tactical philosophy required vehicles designed for high-speed maneuver rather than stand-up fights. The M18 originated in an unlikely place for military vehicle development. Harley Earl's design studio at Buick Motor Division created the initial concepts. Earl brought automotive design experience to military projects. His background in civilian car styling influenced every aspect of the M18's appearance and performance. The result looked and performed more like a racing car with a cannon than a traditional tank. Spring 1944 brought the M18's combat debut in Italy. 5 pilot models were sent to the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the Anzio beachhead. Italian terrain, with its mountains and narrow roads, seemed poorly suited for high-speed maneuvering vehicles. Even under these challenging conditions, the M18's capabilities stunned German defenders. Early engagements remained localized affairs. Their lessons failed to reach Wehrmacht planning staffs. German forces in France continued preparing for massed Sherman tank attacks and conventional tank destroyers like the M10. The M10 was more mobile than German tanks, but still operated within traditional parameters. German intelligence failed to recognize that American tank destroyer doctrine had evolved far beyond conventional concepts. By September 1944, this intelligence failure would prove catastrophic. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion joined the U.S. 4th Armored Division near Aracourt with their M18 Hellcats. German forces in Lorraine operated under fatal misunderstanding of the threat they faced. The 113th Panzer Brigade, formed on September 4, 1944, arrived at Saarburg on September 16 with 42 Panther tanks. Many crew members were Eastern Front veterans. They had faced T-34s and KV-1s in brutal engagements where armor thickness and firepower determined survival. These men understood tank versus tank combat through hard-won experience. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had originally trained on M3 gun motor carriages. Despite requiring several improvements during testing phases, the 704th achieved exceptional training scores. Production Hellcats were eventually issued to replace their original equipment. Months of intensive training perfected techniques that maximized the Hellcat's speed advantages. Crews learned to use terrain for concealment. Hit-and-run tactics became second nature. Radio coordination allowed multiple vehicles to operate as unified hunting packs. September 19th morning found the 113th Panzer Brigade advancing through thick fog toward Aracourt. German commanders expected to brush aside American screening forces quickly. Intelligence had identified Sherman tanks in the area, but no significant anti-tank defenses. At 0715 hours, German Panthers crept forward through the mist at 5 miles per hour. Visibility remained limited to 30 meters maximum. Crews strained to identify targets through the gray void that surrounded their vehicles. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon of 4 M18 Hellcats from Company C, 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, waited in positions near Rechicourt-Lepertite. The tank destroyers had occupied their fighting positions before dawn. Engines idled quietly, while crews scanned assigned sectors through the fog. Lieutenant Leiper led his M18 platoon toward Moncourt when German tank gun muzzles appeared through the mist just 30 feet away. He immediately deployed his platoon for combat. The Germans had no indication of American presence until it was too late. The first sign came when an M18 roared to life and accelerated from complete stop to 30 miles per hour within seconds. A Panther tank required nearly 30 seconds to achieve similar acceleration. The Hellcat burst from concealment, raced to a flanking position, and fired multiple rounds into the nearest Panther's side armor. German turret traverse hadn't completed even halfway toward the threat before their tank was burning. Within 5 minutes, 5 German tanks from the 113th Panzer Brigade were knocked out. American losses totaled 1 M18 destroyed. This engagement demonstrated systematic destruction by an enemy that refused to follow established rules of armored combat. The disparities between Panther and M18 capabilities created fundamental mismatches in combat effectiveness. The Panther's turret weighed nearly 7 tons, including thick armor, and the long 75mm gun. Hydraulic traverse systems required 60 seconds for complete rotation under normal conditions. Combat conditions with engines at low RPM to minimize detection further reduced traverse speeds. The M18's turret weighed just over 2 tons by comparison. Turret traverse speed was dramatically faster when compared to manually rotated systems like the M10. M18 crews could track and engage targets in any direction within seconds, while Panther crews struggled to locate threats. Early combat feedback indicated exceptional mechanical reliability under trying conditions. M18s could travel hundreds of miles without requiring major repairs to armament or engine systems. Crews reported minimal maintenance requirements for the vehicle's moving parts. Panthers suffered chronic mechanical problems despite their fearsome reputation. Final drive failures occurred regularly throughout the war. These components were designed for 35-ton vehicles but installed in 45-ton Panthers. During the September 19th engagement, several Panthers were abandoned due to mechanical failure during attempted pursuit of M18s. The vehicles simply couldn't handle the stress of rapid maneuvering required to counter American tactics. Around 0900 hours, morning fog began lifting to reveal the full sophistication of American tank destroyer tactics. M18s operated as coordinated teams using radio communication to vector each other onto targets and provide threat warnings. Captain Tom Evans directed the lead platoon of Company C to serve as bait for German tanks. The enemy failed to notice two additional Hellcat platoons advancing on their flanks. This represented tank destroyer doctrine executed to perfection. One element fixed enemy attention while others maneuvered for killing shots from advantageous positions. Coordination extended beyond individual platoons into sophisticated combined arms operations. CCA's dispositions around Aracourt consisted of thinly held salients using extended outpost lines. Armored infantry and engineers provided the framework supported by tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery. M18s served as the mobile striking force within this integrated system. By noon on September 19th, the 113th Panzer Brigade's attack had completely stalled. American platoons continued firing and destroyed 10 additional German tanks, while losing 2 more M18s. One platoon M18 commanded by Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann knocked out 6 German tanks, most of which were Panthers. The mathematics were incomprehensible to German commanders. Panthers costing 117,100 Reichsmarks each required 2,000 man-hours to construct. These expensive vehicles were being destroyed by machines costing $57,500 that could be assembled in fractions of the time. Poor tactical deployment exposed German tanks' weaker side armor to Sherman tanks. Using fog as cover, Shermans flanked and knocked out 11 Panthers through coordinated attacks. German forces lacked adequate reconnaissance and had advanced blindly into carefully prepared kill zones. The M18's speed advantage extended far beyond raw engine power. Every aspect of the vehicle had been optimized for rapid movement and quick reaction times. Design incorporated innovative labor-saving maintenance features throughout. The engine mounted on steel rollers allowed maintenance crews to disconnect it from the transmission easily. Rolling it out onto the lowered rear engine cover permitted complete servicing. Reconnection completed the process efficiently. Trained crews could replace entire engines in less than 2 hours. Similar work on Panthers required full days to complete. Buick engineers incorporated torsion bar suspension, providing steady rides at high speeds. German tanks still used leaf spring or interleaved road wheel systems that limited high-speed travel over rough terrain. M18s could maintain 40 miles per hour across broken ground that forced Panthers to slow to 10 miles per hour or risk throwing tracks. The automatic transmission represented another significant advantage. M18s used innovative Torquematic automatic transmission derived from Buick's civilian automotive designs. Drivers could concentrate on maneuvering while transmissions handled gear changes automatically. Panther drivers wrestled with manual gearboxes, requiring double clutching and precise timing under combat stress. These mechanical difficulties multiplied under the pressure of high-speed engagements with fast-moving enemies. American superiority in radio communication proved decisive throughout the battle. Every M18 carried SCR 508 FM radio sets, providing reliable voice communication between vehicles and supporting units. German tanks typically had one radio per platoon, with other vehicles relying on signal flags or prearranged maneuvers. This communication gap multiplied the M18 speed advantages exponentially. American tank destroyer crews coordinated complex maneuvers in real time. Target identification, threat warnings, and tactical adjustments occurred instantly through radio networks. German crews operated in relative isolation. Each tank commander made decisions based solely on what he could observe through vision blocks. The inability to coordinate responses made German tanks vulnerable to coordinated American attacks. September 20th brought the 111th Panzer Brigade into the battle. German tank crews were experiencing something completely unprecedented: fear of an enemy they couldn't effectively engage. The psychological impact extended far beyond immediate tactical situations. These were veterans who had faced T-34s in Ukraine. they had survived the crushing battles at Kursk. Hard-won experience taught them that German tactical skill and technical superiority could overcome numerical disadvantages. The Panther had been their vindication. A tank capable of destroying any Allied vehicle while remaining immune to return fire. Now that certainty lay shattered across the battlefields of Lorraine. Speed differences created tactical situations that German training had never addressed. Panthers designed as offensive weapons to dominate battlefields found themselves desperately defending against enemies that refused to stand and fight. Hellcat crews learned that well-placed shots between the mantlet and glacis plate of Panthers would cause shells to ricochet into driving compartments. This technique killed crews or disabled tanks, but required extremely close range and precise shooting. Such tactics would have been suicidal against enemies that could respond quickly. But Panthers couldn't respond quickly enough. Ponderous turret traverse, slow acceleration, and limited visibility made them vulnerable to enemies that turned every strength into weakness. Germans attempted various adaptations to counter American tactics. Some units began operating Panthers in pairs positioned back-to-back in attempts to cover all angles. This required stationary positioning that surrendered all initiative to Americans. Back-to-back positioning also assumed reliable communication between vehicles. Most German tanks lacked such communication capability. The tactic proved ineffective against enemies that could coordinate attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Behind the tactical revolution lay industrial realities that German officers were beginning to grasp. The M18 wasn't just faster than German tanks. It was easier to produce, maintain, and replace under wartime conditions. Production began in July 1943 with 2,007 units built by October 1944. Production peaked in January 1944 at 250 M18s per month. Each vehicle required approximately 500 man-hours to complete, compared to 2,000 man-hours needed for Panthers. German tank production grew increasingly complex as the war progressed. Panthers required specialized tools, skilled workers, and rare materials. Maybach engines were hand-assembled by craftsmen. Each vehicle was essentially custom-built, limiting production even when resources were available. American factories could replace every M18 lost at Aracourt within 2 days of production. German Panther production, at absolute peak, managed 380 vehicles per month across all factories. This included all fronts, training vehicles, and replacement needs. The loss of 39 Panthers at Aracourt represented over a week's total German production capacity. Such losses were unsustainable given Germany's deteriorating industrial situation. As the Battle of Aracourt continued through late September, American crews refined tactics based on combat experience. M18s began operating in coordinated groups using speed to overwhelm German defenses from multiple directions simultaneously. September 22nd morning saw new tactics employed against German positions near Coincourt. M18s sprinted across open ground at maximum speed, directly toward enemy positions. Panthers, caught completely off guard by the speed of approach, managed only wild shots before Americans were among them. The psychological effect on German crews was devastating. They could hear M18 engines from a kilometer away. Knowing the Americans were coming and responding effectively were entirely different things. M18s covered distances in less than a minute, moving too fast for German gunners to track effectively. The combination of speed and surprise made accurate German return fire nearly impossible. As battles continued, another M18 advantage emerged clearly. Mechanical reliability under combat conditions remained exceptional. Crews reported vehicles could travel hundreds of miles under trying conditions without requiring major repairs. Panthers were maintenance nightmares under combat stress. By September 22nd, The 113th Panzer Brigade reported that many losses were due to mechanical failure rather than enemy action. Final drives failed under rapid maneuvering stress. Transmissions overheated from drivers trying to accelerate quickly to respond to M18 attacks. The M18, built with American automotive mass production techniques and reliability standards, simply kept running under conditions that disabled German vehicles. Air-cooled Wright engines, while loud, were nearly indestructible under combat conditions. Automatic transmissions required minimal maintenance. Torsion bar suspension had few components that could fail catastrophically. September 24th brought coordinated attacks by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion with the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Sherman tanks advanced slowly, drawing German attention and fire, while M18s used speed to infiltrate through wooded areas and dead ground. The tactic worked brilliantly as Panthers engaged Shermans at long range, confident in superior guns and armor. M18s burst from concealment at multiple points, creating crossfires. German tanks caught between threats from multiple directions couldn't respond effectively. By September 25th, senior German commanders began understanding the nature of threats they faced. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, issued new tactical instructions, essentially admitting defeat. His orders stated that enemy tank destroyers of exceptional speed were operating in the sector. German units were instructed not to pursue and not to engage in mobile battles. These instructions reduced Panthers, designed as mobile offensive weapons, to static pillboxes. The orders surrendered all initiative to Americans and acknowledged that German armor could no longer dominate battlefields through superior tactics and technology. The admission represented a fundamental shift in German thinking about armored warfare. By the Battle of Aricourt's End, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had knocked out 39 German tanks, for the loss of 4 M18s destroyed and 3 damaged. This remarkable kill ratio vindicated American tank destroyer doctrine in the most dramatic fashion possible. The battle demonstrated that entire German conceptions of tank warfare could be negated by sufficient speed and tactical flexibility. Concepts based on armor, firepower, and deliberate tactical movement became obsolete when faced with revolutionary American approaches. The M18 had proven that vehicles with armor barely sufficient to stop small arms fire could dominate heavily armored opponents through superior mobility. Speed had triumphed over protection in the most decisive manner possible. December 1944 brought the ultimate test of M18 revolutionary impact during the Battle of the Bulge. German forces launching their last major Western offensive initially achieved surprise and breakthrough. M18-equipped tank destroyer battalions rushing to critical points again proved speed decisive. Team Desaubry, a battalion-sized tank infantry task force of the 10th Armored Division, was assigned to defend Nouville. Just 4 M18 tank destroyers from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion assisted them against units of the 2nd Panzer Division. Team Desaubry's high-speed highway journey to reach blocking positions represented one of few documented cases where M18 Hellcat top speed was actually utilized to get ahead of enemy forces. High-speed deployment to blocking positions ahead of German spearheads repeatedly disrupted German timetables. Panthers and Tigers found themselves engaged by M18s that had raced ahead to favorable positions. American speed concentrated forces at critical points faster than German commanders could adjust their battle plans. Final statistics from the European theater told sobering stories for German armor advocates. The M18 achieved higher kill-to-loss ratios than any other tank or tank destroyer fielded by U.S. forces in World War II. Total kills claimed were 526, including 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific. The European kill-to-loss ratio was 2.3 to 1, with overall kill-to-loss ratios of 2.41 to 1. These numbers became more impressive, considering M18s were not primarily used for tank fighting. They were committed more often to improvised roles, usually direct fire support for infantry. Even when employed outside intended roles, M18s maintained exceptional effectiveness. Fundamental differences between German and American armored vehicle design philosophy were starkly illustrated in contrasts between Panther and M18. Both were designed in response to combat experience, but conclusions drawn were entirely opposite. Germans looked at T-34 sloped armor and powerful guns, deciding they needed something similar but better. Hence, the Panther, with thicker sloped armor and more powerful guns. This was evolutionary response, taking existing concepts to logical extremes. Americans reached revolutionary conclusions. The best armor is not being hit at all. The M18 represented complete reimagining of what armored fighting vehicles could be. Not mobile bunkers, but precision weapons on tracks, able to deliver strikes and evade retaliation. M18's success at Aracourt offered profound lessons about military innovation. Germans had pursued linear development paths: more armor, bigger guns, heavier vehicles. Each tank generation was incremental improvement, fighting the same way, but with greater capability. Americans, constrained by needs to ship vehicles across the Atlantic and faced with enemies that had optimized conventional tank design, chose revolution over evolution. The M18 didn't try to beat German tanks at their own game. It changed the game entirely. Throughout battles around Aracourt and beyond, individual M18 crews performed exceptional acts, demonstrating vehicle potential when manned by aggressive crews. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman, who destroyed 6 Panthers on September 19th, became legend within tank destroyer forces. His techniques using terrain to mask approaches, striking from unexpected angles, and displacing immediately after firing became textbook examples of M18 employment. Individual skill multiplied vehicle capabilities exponentially. October 13th brought elements of the 11th Panzer Division reinforced with Tiger I tanks attempting to retake Aracourt. The battle demonstrated that even Tiger advantages couldn't overcome M18 speed and tactics. Tigers lumbered forward at 15 miles per hour maximum speed, while M18s raced around their flanks. Tiger turrets, even slower to traverse than Panthers, couldn't track fast-moving tank destroyers effectively. M18 development and production stories were themselves revolutionary. From concept to combat deployment took less than 2 years, unprecedented for completely new armored vehicles. The timeline challenged traditional military procurement processes. M18 origins in Harley Earl's design studio at Buick brought automotive sensibilities to military vehicle design. Production processes utilized automotive mass production techniques throughout. Workers who built Buicks could, with minimal retraining, build Hellcats. Unlike German tanks requiring skilled craftsmen and specialized tools, M18s were built using standard automotive components wherever possible. The M18 incorporated numerous technological advantages that multiplied effectiveness in combat. Vehicle fire control systems, while simpler than German optical rangefinders, were faster to use in fluid engagements characterizing M18 combat. Periscopic sights could be operated independently of guns, allowing commanders to search for targets while gunners engaged. German tanks required entire turret rotation for commander observation, making target acquisition slower and more obvious to enemies. M18 ammunition storage was another advantage over German designs. Rounds were stored in protected bins that reduced chances of catastrophic explosions if penetrated. M18 crews could survive hits that would destroy German vehicles, allowing experienced crews to remain in combat. As 1944 progressed into 1945, American tank destroyer doctrine evolved based on combat experience. While initial concepts of held reserves responding to mass tank attacks rarely materialized, M18s found themselves supporting infantry divisions. Mobile anti-tank defense and direct fire support became primary roles. This doctrinal flexibility proved another American advantage. While German Panzer units remained wedded to increasingly obsolete tactical concepts, American forces adapted continuously. M18 battalions developed new techniques for urban combat, forest fighting, and river crossings. These were situations their designers never envisioned. Adaptability multiplied effectiveness across diverse combat environments. By early 1945, the German armored force was caught in impossible situations partly created by M18's success. Unable to match American mobility, German tanks were increasingly relegated to static defense. This surrendered all initiative to Allied forces and made German armor vulnerable to artillery and air attack. Static deployment negated traditional German advantages in crew training and vehicle performance. Production situations were equally dire for German forces. Factories disrupted by bombing and starved of resources struggled to maintain minimal production. Meanwhile, American factories continued producing M18s and other vehicles at rates that seemed impossible to German planners. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Forces, recognized the implications. The M18 was not just a tank destroyer, but physical manifestation of American industrial and tactical superiority. Germany could not win mobile wars against enemies that moved at twice their speed. They could not win production wars against enemies that built vehicles in fractions of the time. The strategic situation was hopeless. Rhine crossings in March 1945 provided final validation of M18 revolutionary impact. As German forces desperately tried to concentrate armor to prevent crossings, M18s raced to critical points, often arriving hours ahead of German forces despite starting from farther away. At Remagen, when the Ludendorff Bridge was unexpectedly captured intact, M18s were among the first vehicles across. Speed established bridgehead perimeters before German forces could respond effectively. Panthers and Tigers rushing to contain bridgeheads found M18s already in ambush positions. German attempts to eliminate bridgeheads were defeated before they could develop momentum. M18 stories didn't end in 1945. During the Korean War, 650 early production M18s were converted into M39s by removing turrets and fitting seats for up to 8 men in open fighting spaces. M39 armored utility vehicles proved chassis enduring value in roles never envisioned by original designers. Perhaps more interesting were reports from former Wehrmacht officers serving as advisors to the new West German Bundeswehr in the 1950s. When evaluating American armor for possible adoption, they universally recommended against heavy tanks in favor of mobile systems inspired by M18 concepts. Former enemies had learned lessons from their defeats. Psychological impact of M18 on German tank crews lasted long after the war ended. Veterans consistently rated the M18 as the most feared American armored vehicle, ahead of M26, Pershing heavy tanks or tank-killing aircraft like P-47 Thunderbolts. The M18 had achieved something remarkable beyond tactical victories. It had broken psychological superiority that German tank crews enjoyed since 1940. The hunters had become the hunted and never recovered their confidence. Production numbers tell the story of M18 impact on American industrial capability. Design initiated December 1941. First prototype tested April 1943. Production began July 1943, with peak production January 1944 at 250 units monthly. Production ended October 1944 after 2,057 total units were completed. Combat performance showed total enemy vehicles destroyed at 526, with M18 losses in combat totaling 216 vehicles. Kill-to-loss ratios reached 2.41 to 1 overall. Mechanical readiness rates maintained 78% throughout combat operations. These numbers demonstrated both vehicle effectiveness and industrial efficiency. Speed comparisons revealed the revolution in armored vehicle performance. M18 Hellcats achieved 55 to 60 miles per hour on roads and 26 miles per hour cross-country. Panthers managed 29 miles per hour on roads and 15 miles per hour cross-country. Tigers reached 24 miles per hour on roads and 12 miles per hour cross-country. Tiger IIs achieved 21 miles per hour on roads and 10 miles per hour cross-country. The performance gaps were insurmountable under combat conditions. Contrasts between Panther and M18 represented fundamentally different approaches to armored warfare. Germans had perfected traditional tanks through heavy armor, powerful armament, and mechanical sophistication. They had taken concepts as far as possible, producing vehicles like Tiger II that represented ultimate evolution of World War I tank concepts. Americans with the M18 didn't build better traditional tanks. They built something entirely different. Vehicles that made traditional tanks less relevant challenged decades of armored warfare doctrine. Prioritizing speed over armor, mobility over firepower, and mechanical reliability over complexity created weapon systems that revolutionized combat. M18 revolutionary design philosophy influence extends far beyond World War II. Modern armored warfare doctrine, emphasizing mobility, situational awareness, and networked operations over pure firepower and protection, traces roots directly to lessons learned from M18 success. Israeli Merkava, American M1 Abrams, and German Leopard II all incorporate lessons from M18 experience. Importance of mechanical reliability, value of superior situational awareness, and critical nature of tactical mobility influenced all subsequent tank designs. While modern tanks are heavily armored, they prioritize speed and agility to degrees that would have seemed impossible to World War II German tank designers. The revolution initiated by the M18 continues in contemporary armored vehicle development. In post-war years, veterans from both sides reflected on M18 impact on armored warfare. American tank destroyer crews spoke with pride about their vehicle capabilities and the revolution it represented in mechanized combat. German tank crews, even decades later, remembered fear and frustration of facing enemies that refused to fight on their terms. The psychological impact proved as lasting as the tactical innovations. At a 1985 reunion at Aracourt, veterans from both sides walked battlefields where the M18 had revolutionized armored warfare. German and American veterans, now elderly men, shared experiences and acknowledged transformations that had occurred there. The ceremony included demonstration of a restored M18, which, even 40 years later, could still achieve remarkable top speeds. As it raced across fields where so many Panthers had met their end, German veterans watched in silence. Their silence was testament to enduring impact of the revolution they had witnessed firsthand. The demonstration brought back memories of September 1944, when their world had changed forever. German tankers encountering M18 Hellcats represent more than tactical innovation or technological superiority. They represent fundamental revolution in military thinking when entire philosophy of warfare was rendered less effective by radically different approaches. Germans had perfected traditional tanks, taking concepts as far as possible with vehicles like Tiger II. Americans with the M18 didn't build better traditional tanks, but something entirely different, that changed the nature of armored combat. German tankers who faced M18s at Aracourt and elsewhere were not just outfought tactically. They were confronted with evidence that their approach to armored warfare needed fundamental reconsideration. Heavily armored Panthers and Tigers, engineering marvels that they were, became vulnerable when faced with enemies that refused to engage on traditional terms. The rules of armored combat had been rewritten without their consultation. With 526 enemy vehicles destroyed for 216 M18s lost, numbers tell part of the story. But real victory was psychological and doctrinal. The M18 proved that wars could be won not necessarily by sides with biggest tanks or thickest armor. Victory went to sides that could adapt, innovate, and implement new concepts fastest. Traditional approaches to armored warfare had been challenged and found wanting by revolutionary thinking applied to vehicle design and tactical employment. German tankers who survived encounters with M18s carried profound lessons with them. In warfare, as in evolution, it is not always the strongest that survives, but often the most adaptable. The M18 Hellcat, racing across battlefields of France at speeds that seemed impossible, firing and vanishing like ghosts, represented adaptability in its purest form. Speed had triumphed over armor in decisive fashion. The revolution was complete. Pure heavy tank dominance was being challenged successfully, and importance of mobility, flexibility, and speed had been dramatically demonstrated to friend and foe alike. German tankers who witnessed this transformation firsthand knew, even if they couldn't fully articulate it at the time, that they were watching not just tactical defeat, but birth of new concepts in armored warfare. Their experience, preserved in military archives and historical studies, stands as evidence that sometimes in warfare, speed and agility can indeed defeat armor and firepower, especially when that speed reaches 55 to 60 miles per hour and comes with a 76mm gun. The M18 Hellcat had done more than destroyed German tanks on French battlefields. It had destroyed German certainty about armored warfare, shattered assumptions about tank combat, and demonstrated that revolutionary thinking could overcome evolutionary perfection. For German tank crews who faced them in fog at Aracourt and beyond, Hellcats represented not just new American weapons, but a new era in mechanized warfare. An era where the race would indeed go to the swift rather than the heavily armored.